A bit of trouble?
That's not a problem. We're having a bit of trouble with Deric Newman getting on. He thought it was fixed. I was expecting him, but he's not arrived back yet.
Okay, I'll contact him now.
Yeah, so what he was saying was it wasn't opening the meeting when he was clicking on it. Right, stop sharing your screen, you, because all I'm looking at is your screen all of a sudden.
I had to figure out how to get, stop share, there we go.
There we are, that's better.
That's a brainwash you, Norman. No, I know, seriously, they got, pictures to explain some things.
Just heads up, guys, you guys are live.
We're live, yeah?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Hello, everyone. We're waiting on an arrival from Deric Newman. So I think if we just hang on for a minute, and if not, it'll be the Steve McCurdy show talking about trees. Deric was or is trying to get connected, but was having some technical issues. Hopefully he'll be fixed soon. Yes, Steve, you adjust your banner.
Well, so Richard done it last week. I thought that's a good idea, Richard.
Yeah, very cunning, yeah, very cunning indeed. So hopefully we'll get Deric very shortly. I know that he was trying about an hour ago to get it working, and so I guess he's been trying constantly since then. What answer did you give to the remaining question on the panel that we've just finished, Steve?
Oh, we talked about, let's say this. Okay, does this work? Can you see that? Can you see the tree coming out the roof of a truck there, Norman?
No, I can just see your screen. Ah, there's Deric, excellent.
You can see it, yeah?
Hey!
Deric.
Right, unshare your screen, please.
Steve, how are you?
Oh, good, thank you.
Right, we're live.
Steve's got better background than I have.
We're live and going.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody.
I'll start the session now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lewis Normand. I'm a sales manager at Bernard's Nurseries, family-owned business based in Rugby in Warwickshire. I also write monthly pieces in Pro Landscaper magazine, occasionally some retail gardening magazines as well. Huge plant fan, and I'm expecting, as I am sure you are as well, to learn quite a bit from these two bastions of the tree planting, growing and moving. Yeah, you heard me right. Yeah. Industry. Two experts.
Who's the oldest though? I think I like the
So I'm going to ask both of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their companies and what they offer. And I also would quite like to know what the ratio of B2B and B2C market is that they operate in, just approximately. So we get an idea as to how much they go direct to consumer and how much they go direct to or straight to a contractor or wholesale or similar. So if we can start with Steve McCurdy, would you introduce yourself, please, dear boy?
Okay, I'm Steve McCurdy. I'm Managing Director of Majestic Trees. We have a 27-acre tree nursery in Hertfordshire, near Harpenden, right off Junction 9 of the M1. And we grow trees from 80 litre to up to 5,000 litre in air pots. So we don't typically supply root balls. It's something we've tried to shy away from, but we supply containerized air pot grown trees that have really high chance of success. And those trees that will be shipped to anybody from an average Joe right up to the biggest estates in Britain. Okay, and this, as far as who we sell to, we do an awful lot with the trade through landscape contractors, garden designers, but there is element of direct with big estates, obviously, head gardeners, groundsmen, etc. And Joe Public, though the Joe Public is a different price point completely from what we'd sell trade.
Are you comfortable saying what the difference in price point is?
38% typically.
Okay, so it's handy for people just to have a rough idea of where their markup potential is.
Mm-hmm.
Deric. Are you there?
Deric?
Deric, we've lost you.
He's muted still. Has he got no video? No, I mean no audio.
Nothing at all. Well, this isn't the smoothest of the sessions that I've done so far today, it's fair to say, but I'm sure it will be one of the most entertaining.
His video, everything's frozen.
Yeah, he's just frozen up.
As he's not moving.
All right, until we get to Deric revives himself, I'm going to ask you first question then, Steve, so that we can really get moving. If you were a garden designer or a landscape contractor, landscape architect, etc., why would you consider employing services of your company to move to supply specimen trees?
Oh, Deric's back.
Oh, Deric's back.
Yeah, I'm back. My connection dropped when you mentioned 38%, Steve.
That was it, was it? It was a margin issue. Okay, right. We'll get you to introduce yourself, and then I'll ask that question again, then, Deric. So, Deric,
yeah, no, I caught that. Hi, guys, with a very rural Wi-Fi connection today. My name is Deric Newman. I'm the Senior Sales Manager at Civic Trees. We're a division of Glendale, a large green services organisation, but prior to that, Civic Trees was a family-owned business, started by my father in 1963. And we specialise in supply, plant and relocate of semi-mature trees and shrubs. We don't grow any trees ourselves. We got out of that part of the industry a while back. It's very competitive and yeah, very specialist part of it. So we're a specialist contractor that are used to handle and to put in the ground large trees and shrubs.
Brilliant, thank you. What sort of percentage would go direct to a client, would you say?
Yeah, I think we're probably 52, 48. There's those numbers again. In terms of going direct to the end user, and 48% is probably, I mean, it's very, very down the middle. 48% is where we're working for or we're contracted by a professional, whether that's a landscape or a garden designer or an agent or something like that.
Okay, so that takes us on to the first question. I'll repeat it. If you were a garden designer, landscape architect, contractor, etc., why would you employ the services of one of your two companies to supply a large tree, install a large tree, maybe even do some early maintenance on it, over supplying much smaller, younger trees, which are probably going to establish a bit quicker? Steve, can we start with you, please?
Sure. Well, I mean, we obviously a little different from Deric. Deric moves big specimen trees that are established in a landscape, which he's very good at. Where we grow very large specimen trees, up to 12, 13-meter trees in airports. So what we're offering is we have a specialist service. We have all the equipment you could possibly want to do the job. We can bring the trees, all the equipment to site. We can offload the trees. We can, install them, guarantee it for 1 year after putting it in. We work alongside a lot of landscape contracts, garden designs, where they'll do, delivery to tree pit service, where they'll have the hole dug to the size specified. And really, it's quote unquote, it's, a delivery service, but obviously we take the risk out of them having to offload the tree, have the equipment on site, the right equipment, and place it in the hole, and we can underground anchor it for them if they wish to. And so very quickly we can, bring out all the equipment in, do the job, and get out. And they don't have to say that they've getting majestic trees to come and plant their trees. They're just like a delivery service, but a specialist delivery service. So that's, and obviously with the airport grown root ball, it's far superior.
Yeah, so you're going to get a greater and more rapid establishment success rate. Yeah. Okay, Deric, why would you employ yourself if you were someone else?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult. I'm just going to echo really what Steve was saying there. It's about having the expertise, the skill sets to know how to handle these large, delicate, expensive plants. I think that most trees that fail are probably destined to fail from the moment they leave the lorry. because they've been handled badly. They may well have been critically damaged through the way they've been handled. And to have the expert techniques and equipment to do that handling is really, really important. I absolutely agree that a container grown tree is going to establish quicker, and air potting is the best way to container grow a tree without a doubt. We're getting much, much better root balls out of that. Actually, in essence, Lewis, in answer to your question, the reason that you would engage with somebody to plant a semi-mature tree as opposed to planting a younger tree is the fact that you're trying to buy the time. And, you know, saying the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now, but to use a semi-mature tree, it can't be denied at all that a smaller tree will, over a reasonably short period of time compared to the life of a tree, catch up in size, but you don't get that impact. And where we're dealing with landscapes that want to look complete because of their scale, you know, if you go and put a load of 12-14s into a 50-acre parkland, you're not going to see those trees. You're not going to really see any benefit from them. But if you go up to, say, 50, 60 centimetre girth plus, then you're actually getting something that's a little bit more finished.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think all of our viewers are going to understand that your buying time as much as anything. Do we think that the price point reflects the time that's gone in? We've been speaking in other panels about the cost of plants being surprisingly low relative to the amount of effort that goes into them. So do you feel that, I think I know where we're going to go on this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you feel that the price point is actually reflective of the amount of effort and time to produce?
Well, yes, I do. I think our prices are a fair reflection of the work that's involved, and it's a conversation I do have fairly frequently with people when they go, "How much?" And then you sort of explain what's involved, and you know, there's a large, significant investment in labour, in machinery, and tooling, and so on and so forth. I'm sure Steve gets this as well, even though you're not in the sort of the tree moving, site move part of the industry, Steve. But you get people ringing up and say, "Oh, I've got a large tree, and somebody's told me it's worth a lot of money." Well, yeah, you know, standing trees are worth a lot of money to people who can move them. The price is there in the moving. I'm sometimes really quite shocked about how, I don't want to use the word cheap, but how good value a tree is ex-nursery. When you think about, and Steve can tell us much more about the effort that goes into maintaining trees, especially when they're above ground, Steve. Must be really scary sometimes. But the amount of work that's required to do that, and yet you're paying a really good price for that sort of timber, for want of a better term, as it leaves the gate. But then it's got to go onto a lorry. Lorries cost a lot of money. Fuel's expensive. And doing the job right is expensive as well.
So Steve, the value of trees, are we getting enough money for the effort required to produce them?
Generally, I'm just showing you a picture. I don't know if you can see it. But there's a Paulownia flying over the roof of a London townhouse with a large tower crane in the street. They've had a street closure. They paid for the crane to come. And that is for one.
Can anyone else see it?
No, not yet, Steve.
I can see your screen, Steve, but I can't actually see any image. Can you bring the image to the forefront?
Try again, shall we? Oh, I see what happened. Okay, do you see it now?
Oh,
yes,
hello.
There we go. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So there's a big tower crane. Somebody's paid for road closure. They paid for a huge tower crane just to put a 35-40 Paulownia over the roof of their house, of the London townhouse, into their back garden. Okay, and the cost of the tree was relatively insignificant compared to the cost of what they wanted to achieve, you know, and what they were willing to pay to achieve. And I just think so often we just do not get the potential of what people are willing to pay if they get what they want. And so often, you know, there it goes into the garden, it's a right mess, but you can see where else it's got, it's a tiny little garden. and there they've got their tree they want in their garden. And, you know, so often we don't sell the sex appeal of what we can give them, you know, and that is an extreme example, okay? But, you know, there's plenty more that we do where they have tower cranes for a number of trees, and maybe they put a hot tub over and everything else over at the same time. But, you know, I just think so often we don't sell the dream of what we can give people. Do you know what I mean? And some people, you know, thankfully in this world are willing to pay those type of prices for something unusual or something unique that does, you know, creates this ambience they want in their back garden. But it's like I said in the previous session, you missed it, but because you had to leave to get ready. But, you know, years ago at Hampton Court, I had a 38-year-old Parotia pom-pom on my stand, and a very eminent nurseryman in our country walked up to me and said, how on earth, how much is that tree? And I said, well, it's $9.5 grand trade, 13 for retail. He says, oh, no one would ever possibly spend that type of money for that tree. And I said, I beg to differ, sir, but, you know, I really do believe there is. And this is 10 years plus ago. And I said, you know, I said, that tree, the nurseryman was given 1,000 Parotia pom-poms, Parotia persica, sorry, and he was given a field as a 16-year-old man said, son, show me what you can do with these 1,000 Parotias. And he grew beehives, cubes, pom-poms, you name it, all sorts of forms of Parotia for 38 years. And I have a number of them on my nursery to this day. Now, unfortunately, this gentleman is no longer with us because of a tragic accident. But, you know, the thing is that we were selling a piece of art. Now, if it was 10, 20,000, 100, I mean, look how much people pay for watches these days, you know, heaven forbid, you know, and nothing wrong with the watch, don't get me wrong, but this tree was 38 years in production and it had the vision and the passion to do it. And we just need to sell what we're doing as why you should pay that type of price. I mean, Victoria Beckham at the time had just been in the papers how many handbags she had and how much she had. I think it was £200,000 worth of handbags. You know, and that's before she starts on the shoes and the clothes. So we need to sometimes grab what we have and sell the dream.
Brilliant. I just want to say to our audience, if anybody wants to ask any questions, we'll run at sort of 15, 20 minutes at the end where we'll do our best to address them. So if you want to, then by all means add them to the chat on the FutureScape Pathable website, and I'll try and address them either as we go or at the end. I think it's a really interesting point, you know, selling the dream. And it's something that some nurseries are very good at and some are disastrous at. They're great at growing, but not great at selling. And it's very important really for, you know, larger material, advanced nursery stock, to be able to do that. But just a quick question to you both. What's the oldest bit of plant material you think you've got on your nursery, Steve? And Deric, what's the oldest bit you've moved? That's a guess, obviously.
Well, currently we have no olives on the nursery, except for one. There's maybe one old piece that's been here 3-4 years. So olives used to be the really old thing I'd have here. But I'd likely 40-year-old tree now is like the oldest I've got in the nursery. So nothing particularly old like we used to have, but it's still a very mature tree, 1.10 meter, 20 trunk, you know, cedars, that type of thing.
I'm 41, so it's mature enough, you know.
Yeah. Well, I started it when I was 20 years old and now 60. So, you know, I've been growing them a long time, you see, Norman.
Deric, what's the oldest thing you think you've moved?
Yeah, so, you know, we have a different angle at getting into older trees now than Steve does, because Steve's very much just in the nursery game, and yeah, there you're going up to that sort of 120 centimeter girth stuff, apart from the allayas. When we're out moving trees, we might be moving an oak tree. I think the largest one that we've done is something with a stem circumference of just over 2 meters.
Wow.
And so that was probably maybe 80 years old or so. The key to doing that is the same as it is to moving trees out of the nursery. You've got to create a good root ball to it. And so there we were looking at a root ball that was just over 4.7 meters in diameter. That was a site move. That was moving a tree on site. But yeah, that's what I'd say that we're probably looking at nursery wise. Yeah, it would be the same as Steve says. And the great thing is, of course, that we don't really know how old trees are. It's very difficult to tell until you cut them down.
Yeah.
But then they ain't getting any older.
Yeah, shooting yourself in the foot somewhat by cutting them down. Okay, so Steve, you mentioned there you've been doing this for a good while now, roughly my age. How did you get into it?
Well, truthfully, my grandmother was a farmer's wife. She could grow anything, literally, doesn't matter what it was, dahlias, bedding plants, fruit orchards, vegetables, a lot. And I used to spend about 8 weeks a year with her. My mother could garden, but she wasn't that good. And she still isn't. She keeps a tidy garden, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. But my grandmother growing, and she got me hooked on growing, to be honest with you. So I kind of, when I was 16, I went to college, studied horticulture. I went to work for Thomas Rochford, who was the big nursery in this country, over 400 employees, but Joseph was a small sidekick, and because Thomas is no longer in business and Joseph's still going. We all know Joseph Rochford, Lady Green. But that's where I really learned my, the game, and I went to the States as an exchange student in '79, and I learned a lot, about how to think big in America, I guess, and also big containerized trees was a really big thing in the States at the time. And when I came back, that's what I decided to do, was go do majestic trees. Yeah, but I've been in horticulture for 43 years, I guess.
And Deric, you've come in as another family business. You followed your father's footsteps. What drove you to want to do that?
I'm trying to think of some wonderfully inspirational road to Damascus type story, but it was no. Look, I genuinely I couldn't really think of anything else I wanted to do. It's something I've grown up with in terms of trees have been a big part of my life ever since forever, and so going to do landscape contract management at Kingston University and Merest Wood sort of gave that educational background into it all and what have you. But it was something that, as Steve alluded to, it's a passion. You have to do this thing because you want to work with trees, and there's just nothing better than planting trees. It's just a fantastic thing to do. And I think that's at any scale. I think you're fortunate to be a tree planter, whether you're planting forestry sized plugs or whether you're dealing with super-sized semi-mature trees. And so in terms of it being something that was available to me, it was something that I just thought, yeah, I will carry on and I will do that.
So obviously it makes sense for me now to ask you, if you were to have your chance again, would you do what you're doing?
I don't know. There's an awful lot that I have been witness to. There are some wonderful places that I've been. There are some fantastic projects that I've been involved with that I would miss dearly. Yeah, but it's difficult when you've been part of a when you've been in an industry all your life. That's a really interesting question to know. Would you do it all again? Yeah, there's not a huge amount I would change in terms of what I was going to do. I could also be skippering a yacht in the Caribbean, which is also
rather.
yeah. It's a bit cold in Hertfordshire today, isn't it, Steve? So yeah, let's think that. Yeah, there's I can't think of anything else that I would rather do. Yeah, I would put it like that because it's such a fantastic industry to be involved with.
Steve, would you set up Majestic again? Is it the route you'd take if you were doing it now?
Yeah, I would. I think I've learned a lot. I made lots of mistakes over my life, and I think if you don't make mistakes, you don't go anywhere. But there's no question I could have done some things better. I think the journey of life in the business world. I mean, I've been in business now since I was 24, so 36 years for myself. So it's quite a long time, and I've had some roller coaster years where 92 recession was like the worst for me. But you know, you learn now. We got no recession right now, so it makes you a lot wiser. When you go into the next one, you know cash is king, and to make sure you got plenty of cash, otherwise you can really stress yourself out worrying about how you're going to pay all your bills. But I think it's, you know, there's lots of things I've learned about, you know, growing, you know, planting, etc. over the years from experience, you know, and from watching other people and learning from other people that go before you. I mean, it's like Deric alludes to his dad. I mean, he was one of the, you know, the early, founders of tree moving. I mean, it was done in Victorian times. It kind of got forgotten through the war years, I would say, and it was only really resurrected in this country with civic trees, you know, after the war. But you know, there's a lot of things we've learned and perfected since those days, because now we have far better equipment, hydraulics, etc., and so on.
Brilliant. Well, it's good to know that you're doing the things that you love to do, and that you wouldn't necessarily change a great deal about them. That's obviously, you know, a tremendous success story on both parts. For anyone listening and watching, it's fairly obvious that what these two do is incredibly skilled, and even though it's different, the relatable skills are very similar, and that there are just a handful of people in the same sort of position, not just across the UK, but really across Europe. I think it would be useful if both of you could talk us through the process that you operate under, as in, where does your project start and end typically? There probably won't be a typical, but where would you operate from? Is it a planning stage all the way through to implementation or aftercare? Or do you know, a typical journey of a tree that you're working with? Steve, can we start with you?
I'm sure if you want, I'm going to actually have, hopefully I can make this work, but this is an example of a cedar tree, okay? And I just thought this could be interesting for you to see. There's a large root ball of a Cedrus labani that I bought in the lakes. And does it move to the next picture now?
Yep.
Okay, good. And the tree comes in, we containerize, we pot it, we grow it on. And here someone's bought this tree, and it's been grown in air pots. It's a much larger root ball. And here we're struggling to get the tree into the truck. But the tree has to go into the truck, and after 35, 40 years, a lot of it in northern Italy, that tree is growing into quite a substantial tree. And some of these pictures are actually not the same tree, to be totally honest with you, which some of you may pick up on. But the tree gets on, you know, it's no point rushing, you know, this specimen tree and just damaging it on the way to the job, because the customer won't be happy if they don't get the tree they paid for. So anyway, the tree gets on the truck, we get the tree delivered, ready for delivery, and off it goes. And then you've got to get to the job site, you've got to figure how you're going to get it planted. Now, having the right equipment is really important, but it's also planning how it's going to get from the truck to the final resting place. And you've got to think about underground services, matting out, etc. In this case, the tree is coming off the truck, and then this particular telehandler has a roll suspension, so you roll right through, so you can see it's on an angle. Otherwise, the machine will roll over. So it's been thought through, and you get the tree around to the back of the house, get the tree upright, and then literally you can drive across with the tree, hang on bolt straps with a sling around the trunk, and you can actually place that tree into the hole and anchor it. And so a situation like that, you can deliver and plant the tree with the right equipment, and that's really what it's about. I mean, Deric's got an awful lot of equipment for moving trees, but I thought that'd be interesting to show you. Now I've got to figure out how to get out of this.
So if I can ask then, with that one tree,
that was one cedar, yeah.
When you purchased it in Italy, how long from there to it being a tree available for sale?
Well, it depends entirely on, I mean, they was talking about how you always know from the beginning if the tree's going to be good or not. But, you know, there's trees I buy, big cedars, sometimes they haven't been undercut maybe 6-8 years, which is rather, you know, pushing their luck. Certain things like Cedrus deodora will drop their needles and they'll recover pretty quick. Atlanticus labani is not quite as robust, but they will come back. So, I mean, but you get it in an air pot and root it out completely into a solid, massive root. It really does make a massive difference. It's like, you can see, there's another picture here I'll just show you.
And is that rooting likely to take more than a year for you, would you say?
Pardon me?
Is the rooting process likely to take more than a year, settling in?
Oh, sometimes it takes 2 years. Right. Sometimes it takes, 3 years. It depends entirely on the tree. You know what I mean? Every tree is different. So trees that are fast growing are going to root far quicker than trees that are slow growing. And of course, if they haven't been undercut regularly, I mean, a tree that's been undercut 3 years ago, it's going to be far, far better root system than one that's been undercut 8 years ago. So it take time, and the rooting out period in the air pot, where you get to a solid root system, is. Do you see that sequoia dendron right now? Do you see that picture of that?
Yeah.
You look how solid that root ball is. I mean, it's just absolutely solid, gorgeous tree, solid as a rock. And you can just, it's very, it's not flexible really in the slightest, because it's just massive fibrous root. So, when you put that tree in the ground, it's going to just romp away as long as it gets water and doesn't sit in water, the combination of both, you know what I mean? And so often that's really, people don't always, understand the importance,
Most of your limitations seem to be the size of the truck. Size of the truck seems to be what determines the maximum size tree that you can offer. Is that a fair thing to say, or have you got another truck up your sleeve?
No, the trailers are 13.6 meters long, the longest trailer. We can stick out the back 2 meters. So that's pretty much, where we try.
Yeah, width is always more of an issue, really, isn't it? I mean, we're looking at some special transports at the moment for trucks that are 3 meters wide, and it's not very easy. And of course, you'll end up then with somebody who's buying a tree that needs a 3 meter wide truck isn't necessarily going to live just off a dual carriageway with really nice straightforward access. I just want to go back to Steve's presentation there, because I think that, Steve, that really gives an excellent indication of what you're buying when you're buying a semi-mature tree. Even the labour cost of putting that tree in that truck, because as you rightly say, you don't want to damage it before it's delivered. There was numerous members of staff involved in that, and those people all need to get paid, etc., etc. It is a really intensive process, all of that, and so that's really important. That's really well demonstrated through those shots there.
So, Steve, in terms of the process or the journey of a tree, we've looked at the journey from you purchasing to it being potentially saleable. How do you speculatively buy, or do you buy to order for a customer who in 3 years' time is going to want such and such for a particular project?
Almost everything on the nursery is on speculation. So typically, I only done 2 trips in September, first week of October, but typically I do 10, 12 trips a season around Europe, tagging trees, negotiating to buy stock, and then bring them back to the nursery to grow on speculation. Obviously, if someone wants to give me an order for some big specimen trees for next autumn, I'm very happy to take them. One customer gave me an order for 44 big lime trees for an avenue. So those have mostly come in now and been set out, and they'll be part of the next week. But typically, the vast majority of specimens are on speculation. I buy what I think is a nice looking tree. I think it's desirable. There's a market for it, and hopefully negotiate a good enough price that I can work with and make my margin on and grow it on for 1, 2, 3 years till it gets sold. I've got trees on this nursery. I've got one that's actually 18 years on the nursery. It was already 40, 45 when I bought it. So you can imagine how big it is now.
What is that, an ugly duckling, or why has it stayed so long, would you say?
Well, truthfully, we planted the landscape until about 6 years ago. That's why. And then we've dug it up, and it's supposed to go to London Zoo, to the monkey enclosure. That's where it's going now. They had a major prune to reduce it because it was about 6 meters wide. And it wouldn't go on it, even on a wide load, it wouldn't go through London.
So most of your customer base then is going to be turning up to the nursery, walking the aisles, selecting a tree they like, and then agreeing a price and agreeing a delivery, and then you'll install almost all of those, drop them into a pit. Would that be fair?
Oh, you'd be surprised. I mean, we have some, I mean, there's a major landscape. I mean, he collected the other day the biggest trees that I had collected in my life. One was 4,000 litre, and he collected it on an Arctic. It was surprised. We loaded it for him, but they had 2 Arctic loads of trees, and there was one huge one, and then some, you know, Protea pom-pom. We talked about one of those earlier, one of those, and some other big trees, and they actually collected them, which is not typical. Typically, we deliver those and deliver to tree pit. It's pretty common for the contract. Yeah.
So Deric, the same sort of question to you then. Where's your typical journey from a project, just looking at the specific journey of a tree that you're either going to move for someone or that you're going to install having bought it?
Okay. Well, why don't I, because Steve's really covered off the supply and plant element of there. So yeah, we do all of that from, you know, people getting in touch with us when they're at planning stage or whatever, or typically that's most projects, by the time they get to being on the ground, the value for the trees has gone down. But let's talk about tree moving, relocation as a different part of the same sort of thing in terms of moving trees in the landscape. And we will often get approached by people who are looking to develop a piece of land, and they've got a tree that is slap bang in the middle of where they want to proceed with that work. And if it's up to 90, 95 centimetre girth, then I'll trundle up with the tree spade and we'll do the tree moving process with that, assuming that the tree is not going to travel too far. So our largest tree spade is 2.15 metres in diameter. I can't say it's the largest. If you can
just explain a tree spade, we're talking about a 3-pointed spade that's going to dig down?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's six blades, but they're steel blades that get driven into the ground and they encapsulate the root ball. Well, the first thing the tree spade does is it digs the planting hole that's going to be used. So it's a very rough and ready way of moving trees, but it's successful. You know, it's the mechanical revolution for moving trees that occurred in the late 60s or so.
Is this the Newman tree spade?
No, Newman never invented a tree spade. We had a frame and a trailer, and that was the sort of more manual way of moving trees. And we still do frame trees, although, you know, regulation is making that a little bit more tricky. But we still create, again, it's about holding together a root ball. So we use an American veneer for our big tree spade. Then we've got 3 optimals, which are a German make at smaller sizes. So moving trees up to 95 centimetre girth is fairly straightforward with the tree spade. If it's bigger than that, then we're going to be looking at creating that root ball manually, excavating by hand, somehow looking to hold that root ball together, because as we see with trees that come out of the nursery, whether they're field grown or air pot grown, they're going to be wrapped in hessian and wire, hold them together. Obviously a container grown tree or a containerized tree is going to possibly arrive in its container, but binding that root ball together is what's so important. So we look to do that with a frame system, or sometimes by driving plates underneath the tree as well. And then we get into the point where we lift the tree. And as I think about all the processes that are involved in moving and planting trees, it's lifting that heavy item and moving it that is the tricky piece of the operation that you need to do. Obviously you can go around and dig a tree by hand. That's perfectly feasible. You can drum lace it. You don't need any particular equipment, but at some point, something mechanical is going to have to come along and lift that tree out of the ground. So we might get involved in planning applications whereby, you know, if they spend £17,000 moving a tree using the frame and a crane system, but if that enables them to release a whole parcel of their land or develop the land in a certain way, it could be worth millions to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so that idea that you're going to be working with planning or working on their behalf with planning, does that happen a lot?
Yeah, a lot of the time we're moving trees because people have been told they have to move them.
Right.
So moving a tree is a way for them to obtain the planning permission that they want. And that's great. Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's a really good way for things to be going. It's really important, though, that they also recognise that that tree should be moved somewhere nice and quiet, out the way at the side, where the tree can just sit for a little while, recover. We might want to do 25–30% reduction on the tree. Because don't forget, this root ball probably has not been prepared. Ideally, we'd get 3 years notice, but sometimes we're lucky if we get 3 weeks notice. You know, so this tree is just going to get very sensitively ripped out of the ground and replanted over there. And with the best will in the world, you're not going to take all the root that it needs. So I advocate a reduction. I mean, I think it's actually something that we should do with all trees when they're planted, is give them a bit of a prune, but it's really difficult conversation to have with the client to say, here's your invoice, I've planted your trees and I'm just going to take 20% of them away. But it does help with the establishment and you get better trees in the long run. So anyway, so yeah, always move a tree somewhere nice and quiet. Please don't move a tree so it's front and center of the development. Use a big nursery prepared tree to do that. More than anything, it's going to establish better. It's going to make your development look better, quicker.
So install with something new and move something old to a less crucial spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a useful bit of advice.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think it's something that we need to bear in mind, that a tree, in terms of relocation, a supply and plant tree will hopefully look cracking from year one, but a tree, if you imagine moving a large oak tree or something like that, they'll often put on a huge amount of epicormic growth in the first couple of years. And this isn't necessarily just on the trunk, but it can be across their whole branch network. And so they just sort of have really fluffy branches for a few years. And sometimes the finer branch and twig network will actually die right back. And that's just the tree adjusting because of what it's been through.
A response to trauma.
Absolutely, yeah. But you know, the tree is still alive, absolutely, and it will continue to grow and maintain that environment, that habitat. So
I'm going to ask you now, both of you, and you'll likely have a different perspective on it, which is good. What questions should designers, architects, planners, even private clients be looking to ask when they're considering purchasing a semi-mature tree or a mature tree and Deric installing said tree? What should they be thinking about? What should they be asking? We're needing to look really into the depth of legality, cost, additional implications on cost like maintenance and upkeep, and all the things that you've encountered over the years that might not be immediately obvious to people. So Steve, what do they need to think about? What do they need to ask you?
Well, I mean, I think before we even get into the actual mechanics of planting the tree, I think a lot of people design fabulous looking, great designs, and then they go in search of the perfect specimens to really nail their design. And there's certain eminent designers in our industry, and what they might shoot me for telling you guys this, but what they typically do is, because of their status in industry, they get customers who really want them to design their garden. And they basically shake hands that they're going to charge them X for the design and X for a rough ballpark budget-wise for planting this, hardscape, whatever. And then they go, so they haven't got maybe quite a signed contract, but close enough. And then they go off and they find the specimen trees they're going to design into this job. Now they have this picture in their head of what they want to see, but they go around looking for the perfect trees. And once they've got the perfect trees on it, 1-2 days, recce, and then they go to the drawing board, draw it up, deliver it to the customer. The customer thinks this is fantastic. 3 specimens you've selected are just perfect for this. And then we go to plant it. The customer just thinks it's totally amazing. It's just a perfect design. But they've designed the whole garden around what they find as being the perfect trees for their conceptual design. So that's one issue, number one. Next is access. So many people don't really consider how difficult it will be to get the tree in. sometimes it's very simple to get trees in, sometimes it's more difficult. I mean, we saw that earlier project. I mean, I've got some other ones I can show you right now. I mean, there is a job. Do you see the picture of the tree? Okay. I mean, this is a big designer in London, okay, who does a lot of big projects like this. And he's very, very good at his job. He gets lots of these type of London courtyard gardens. And a big crane again in the street. We've got a great big talpa that's coming up the truck first. This is one of our Arctics. And I'll move along rather than bore you with the whole thing. So the tree is getting, is rigged. Next thing is going to be going over the house. And but then we'll go on to the final picture. And actually that shows the tree actually going into the garden now, okay? But you can see he's got 4 pits already prepared. So I didn't actually schedule the crane, the designer this, because he does it all the time. So he had this project totally nailed, how he was going to design. He designed it brilliantly. He selected the specimens, and then he had the whole thing totally planned out how he was going to achieve the finished product. And you can see, I have other pictures that show the trees going into the tree pits, but I didn't pull them out, unfortunately.
That's going to be 4 trees with an actual canopy in that little space.
There's a canopy. There's a big oak. There's this big talpa. Then there's big magnolia, multi-stems, that type of stuff. Okay, wow. So there's lower canopy stuff too. But it's it's a really slick design, to be honest with you. But it just shows what can be done if a designer thinks it through. And because the client was thrilled with the job. I mean, this guy, we do a few jobs per year for him, and he just gets job after job, because people that have obviously the financial wherewithal to pay for all that, they have parties on their patio with all their friends and say, "Oh, this is fantastic what you did here," and they say, "Oh, Cole, I'm not gonna say the name because he doesn't want me to, but
the cost of installation is a big factor here.
Well, he paid for the crane and the partial road closure. It wasn't full road closure on that, but just the trees were significant, absolutely. But I think the cost of the road closure and the crane was more likely than the trees. But it's just another. Well executed, well planned, well thought, great design, and well thought through.
And are there cost implications on insurance if you're doing things like that?
Well, you have to have insurance to fly trees over people's houses, yeah.
What happens if the tree gets damaged? Never mind the house.
Well, if the tree gets ringed, that's cheap compared to the tree falling through the roof of the house.
True, very true. Yeah, very true. Has that happened to you before?
Never.
No, good. Yeah, that's the way to keep it. So installation, transport and installation are obviously going to be big factors that people should really, really consider and cost out appropriately before they actually commit to a semi-mature tree. What about the cost of upkeep, which is probably moving more towards Deric's territory there, in terms of once you've guided it, once you've soiled it back up, what are we doing in terms of watering, maintenance? Where are the costs there?
Yeah, absolutely. I see too many trees that fail and don't establish because the maintenance is incorrect, whether that's too much water or too little water. It's absolutely vital that a decent amount of maintenance is set aside for the tree. I advocate, my sort of gold standard, best possible maintenance would probably be 5 years following planting. In year 1, I would probably want to visit the tree fortnightly between April and the end of September. So that might be sort of 12 visits. And each of those visits, we're going to be looking to water the tree up towards field capacity, because trees don't necessarily want water per se. They want moist soil that they can take nutrients out of, and they can work with that soil. Some trees do want water or thrive in wet ground, and some trees really don't like it and prefer it to be much drier. So, everything when it comes to maintenance is species specific and it's site specific and it's climate specific. Although saying that, I've never yet really had an English summer where we've had enough water to negate the need to give some artificial irrigation. And then what we'll do over time is we will, over the 5 years, is we taper down the amount of watering that we're giving the tree. And so by year 5, we're probably not doing any artificial irrigation whatsoever. And we might just visit 3 times just to make sure everything's okay. And that's just a case of making sure that tree establishes in the landscape. And if you water over a summer period and then you don't return the following year, the tree's not really going to be expecting that. So you've got to sort of wean it off the artificial irrigation side of things. One of the big issues that we've had recently, and particularly an issue this year, I felt, was the really hot, sunny weather that we had over early May, or was it mid-May this year? All the young growth was just obliterated by days of relentless heat and relentless sunshine. And you can give a tree as much water as you like, but you can't provide it with the shade that it needs to stop this onslaught of sort of radiation, I guess.
Yeah, transpiration causing it stress.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but also, you know, even if you kept the tree really wet, it's just getting that young, fresh foliage is getting beaten up by the sun, and trees get sunburn. So yeah, I would look ideally 5 years, tapering down year on year, at least a year, please. And sort of 3 is probably the happy medium where I'll go, yeah, you know, we're going to get this tree well established. Is
there a way to price this that's relative to the cost of the tree? What are we expecting to pay? If we're paying £10,000 for a tree, how much are we going to be paying over that 3-year period?
I wouldn't know, because it's too much. It's too variable in terms of how far have I got to send somebody to water the tree? How many trees are they going to be watering while they're there? Yeah, there are too many variables. I'm not going to give you a price over the phone, Lewis. I'll get you a quote by the middle of next week.
Call your services to find out.
Yeah.
But could it be as much as a third over that time period?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, easily. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you might almost say you spend a third of the project price on the tree, you spend a third on planting it, and you spend a third on maintaining it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, why not? Yeah.
So are there any other hidden costs or considerations that people need to make when they're installing trees, would you say?
I think we need to talk, well, I was just going to talk about tree pits.
Yeah, go for it.
And another really vital component of it, but a tree has to be well grown, it has to be well handled, and it has to be well planted into a pit of the right size, and then it has to be well maintained. In a green space environment, that tree pit should be at least 500 mil bigger than the root ball, perhaps a little bit bigger if the soil that it's going into is particularly not conducive to growing. But the main thing not to do, and if anybody takes anything away from this session, is please don't plant your trees too deep. Always plant them, even 50 mil higher. So the top of the root ball is 50 mil above the surrounding soil, and just mound the soil up to the top of that root ball. You imagine that tree growing in the nursery, its roots are at a set depth below the surface of the soil, and that's how the tree breathes and how it gets water. And if you put more material on top of that, you're just making a real hard issue for that tree to keep itself going and to get establishing. So please, no material on top of the root ball at all, and make sure that the root ball is above the top of the root ball should be above the surrounding ground level. In an urban situation, of course, you can probably go back to that formula of a third on the tree, a third on the planting, a third on the maintenance, and put it into 4, and then you're spending a lot of money creating a good tree pit. But trees need space to grow, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And if you can dig a big hole in an urban environment and fill it with a root cell system of one form or another, then that's absolutely fantastic. That's a really good way to get trees established.
Have you, to highly professional gentlemen at any point in your careers had to say, ordinarily I offer a guarantee, but I'm unable to because what you're trying to do goes against my recommendation in terms of the size of the tree that we're moving, or the time we're moving it, or the time we're planting a tree and buying it. Have there been any occasions where you found that with the best advice provided by yourselves, people have still made bad decisions?
There's a famous celebrity game show host that we've done a lot of work for, most lovely guy. And he had his mindset, him and his wife, that they were going to have a certain type of tree. I told him, I said, it's not, your soil is not conducive to this tree. The exposure is not conducive to this tree. And he wanted a whole avenue of them, plus dotted around, basically Italian cypress, Italian sempervirens, okay, Italian, you know. And he absolutely loved this tree. They saw it on their honeymoon and they just wanted to load them. And they planted lots of other trees there. But the long and short of it is, unfortunately, of course, they practically all failed. And he says it was he now says it's totally my fault. I ever you know, talked to you know, said I had to have them. I totally accept it was my decision. But sometimes I think sometimes you have to. You could argue I should have walked away from it and just say I refused to supply them. But I made it very clear in writing as well, and there was witnesses there. And he's not that type of guy anyway. But he really wanted that particular, because it was something he dreamt of for 25 years to plant in his dream house, you know. Well, he needs to have his dream, you know, his holiday home maybe in Italy, and have some gorgeous big ones then.
You could have done it some Leylandii, Steve.
I mean,
You'd have just done him some Leylandii.
yeah.
Yeah, well, they might have survived.
But you know, getting back to your question about, you know, maintenance, I mean, I think if you're going to move large specimen trees, there is, you know, there's a big cost to move them. The value of that tree, if you were to replace it, is practically impossible to replace it often if you move it to. So it's critical, I think, to do the maintenance and do it for the period of years that someone like Deric would recommend, because there's no ifs and buts about it. It's gone through open heart surgery. It's going, you know, like Deric says, you need to cut it back 20% because the tree for to survive. And it's a very tricky thing. And like Deric says, oh, so often you want 3 years to get them prepped, and they give them 3 weeks. And we have people call me and they want to move great big trees. And, you know, we tell them, well, we recommend someone to you, but you're going to have to, you know, it's not an ideal thing to do it this year. And they usually always say, oh, we can't wait. We've got the extension going on, or the parking lot going, or whatever, you know, they can't wait for the tree to be moved. But having, you know, in our case with an airport grown tree, I mean, I can show you a few more pictures real quick. I mean, you've got, you know, example of, this is delivered to tree pits. So you can see these are Acer Freemanni autumn blades. And you can see how solid those root balls are. So there they get lowered into the tree pit, but you've got a solid root ball, and it's a solid root system and complete root system. It hasn't been just cut out of the ground recently. So when you come to do the maintenance, that particular tree is in relatively heavy clay. It doesn't want to be waterlogged, but it does need a lot. An Acer Freemanni autumn blaze will grow very quickly, so it needs a lot of water. You need to have good maintenance on it for 2 seasons. You know, we know ifs and buts about it, but it's, you know, it's a lot simpler to establish an airport grown tree versus a, you know, something that's being moved. I mean, to move an Acer Freemanni autumn blaze, as you know, whilst it grows fast and would move, you're going to have an awful lot of dieback on it because it needs that root system to sustain that big canopy on it. And that was in July. I mean, not many people would even dare plant a big Acer Freemanni autumn blaze in July, because I mean, the water demand is, you know, it's huge. But that tree romped away because it's being grown, and as you can see, it's a really solid root ball. Yeah.
Steve, just quick, have you got any pictures of an undressed container grown airpot root ball? Because what I think is really interesting about it, you do get a fantastic network of roots, which are going to really help support that tree. But do the fine fibrous feeding roots go below sort of 300-400 mil depth? what are the roots like right down at the bottom of those root balls? Oh, there you go. Perfect.
That's a wing nut, okay, which you could argue is a very good example because it has a nice white root. Do you know what I mean? So it shows really well. If I was to dig you, I'd have to go dig for it right now while we're talking. I could find some other pictures, but typically lower down to the bottom of the pot depends on the tree and how deep it naturally roots. You know what I mean? And you know, you get trees in from the continent. Some of them will come with 500 deep maximum root balls because they grow on over sand. Do you know what I mean? And so that's how they're going to grow. Whereas some that will have a bit deeper root ball. But honestly, there's not a lot of point having a very, you know, a meter 20, meter 50 deep root ball. It's just pointless. It's just, you know, because it's hard to handle and work with anyway. You know, our deepest root balls in the nursery are like a meter deep. And those are great big cedars, you know what I mean? Yeah. And, but, you know, the fibrous root will not maybe be quite as, I mean, wing nuts grow like the clappers, you know what I mean? And they have a lot of fibrous root because they have very high water uptake. So they're going to root out very quickly and put, you know, mass. And there's no spiraling. That's what's so great about an airpot tree. There's no spiraled up root ball. They're just sitting there, all those nice white roots ready to explode into the ground when they get planted.
Yeah, I think it's a particularly useful image so people can understand the value of using air pots and also the, you know, the ideal situation with a root system that's fresh and young, keen to go.
Absolutely, and that's the absolute takeaway benefit of an air potted tree is that you've got an entire root system, as Steve says. As you say, it's young, it's ready to go. It's sort of almost restricted inside that air pot. It's waiting to get out and blast into the environment that it's planted into. And that's why it's really important to make sure that the backfill material is good and is going to be conducive to that tree growing into it, and it's not too much of a shock for it. There's no argument about that. I can't really even think the last time that I had a failure on a air pot grown tree.
Just a quick question on the air pot process, Steve. When you remove the ring, how soon before, or what time scale do you allow to remove and rewrap with hessian before delivery?
Well, they get peeled and wrapped right then and there. You know, it's all
just at the point of loading.
Well, I mean, we'll this time of year, of course, it's middle of summer. We'll very rarely root ball anything on a Friday. It's going to go on a Monday because you know, if it's hot, I mean, it's just not a wise thing to do. But this time of year, we may be 2 days ahead sometimes of our shipping in root balling because of deciduous trees. I mean, so it's a totally different time of year. And but typically, you know, you got to think, is a tree growing? Does it need light? Does it need all those factors as to why you would not root ball a tree early if it's still growing.
And if we could just circle around to a point from before, in a nursery perspective, and Deric, you hold trees as well, so you're both doing it. Watering is obviously a big factor in terms of success or potential for success. How much water are you applying to larger established trees? I mean, it's obviously going to be a bit here and there. If you could give an example, that'd be helpful.
I mean, it's like an oak. I mean, an oak will use 10 to 15% of what a big willow would use. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's such a range. It's a bit, you know, and it depends on the soil, heavy clay versus, you know, free draining to sandy soil.
But on the nursery, specifically on the nursery, when you've got them on drippers, how much water are you putting through most of your trees to keep them going?
Well, I mean, we'll have willows that'll get 300-400 litres in a day. You know what I mean? On huge willows. You know what I mean? Where the comparative size oak tree will be lucky if it gets 40 to 60 litres a day. You know
right,
I mean?
Okay.
Maybe not when it's pushing into full leap once it's established. So you have to, and obviously it depends on the temperature. I mean, there's a massive difference between 25 degrees, 28, 30, and 35 degrees. I mean, it just goes like that. The water demand, do you know what I mean? And you can have on certain trees that are fast growing, I mean, they cannot get the water quick enough. And so you'll have trees wilting, because if they were in the general landscape, you'll see, even then you'll see them wilting when it's incredibly hot. If you imagine a container, even in an air pot, has fabulous fibrous root system and a really solid mass of root, but there's still a contained area of soil where those roots are. And so you can't get the water into those roots quick enough when it's 35 degrees to get the water up the tree. If it's like a wingnut or willow, you're going to get a bit of the transpiration will be going on quicker than the capillary, movement up the tree. But it's still, it's not going to, the tree's not going to die, but you will see a difference. I mean, where an oak tree, it won't bother at all, because it's lots less water demand.
But I think the idea that you're potentially having to give hundreds of liters of water a day during a warmer period is it's a lot for people to be able to deliver upon if they're then applying that to the ground when they've relocated it. So, but it's also very important that they understand that there is a big water requirement, way more than a lot of people might consider.
But the water demand, so the water demand once you planted it in heavy clay soil will be far less than would be in an air pot sitting above the ground on a nursery. And so, whilst it is definitely a consideration, absolutely should be, it is nothing like the demand. And if people give it the same amount of water, because if it's sitting in heavy clay, it's almost, sometimes almost like a swimming pool down there if you put that much water on it. And you can still have the thing croaking and dying because there's no air down there at all.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's move on to a slightly different topic then. Let's move on to the dreaded talk about Brexit. Where is this going to affect us? Still, a lot of our trees, larger trees that are coming in from Europe. What issues are we likely to encounter in the near future?
Delay.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, there's going to be delays in terms of goods moving from the continent into the UK. I don't see any plant-specific issues relating to Brexit. They're going to be the same issues that affect all goods and travelling from the continent into the UK. I know we'll probably touch on biosecurity shortly as well, and that's sort of going to happen at the same sort of time. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen to the costs either. But to have a restriction on movement of people and because of COVID-19, the looming Brexit ramifications and ongoing concerns about biosecurity has meant this has been a particularly difficult year if you're somebody who would normally travel to the continent to undertake part of their work. So it was Steve alluded to earlier when he said he'd only done 2 visits so far this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, what do you see Brexit having an impact on your business?
I mean, COVID is a far bigger challenge than Brexit right now, to be honest.
Yeah. I didn't want to give you 2 challenges. One was enough.
It's hard enough to run a business. I mean, there's really a double whammy this year, that's for sure. But I mean, we're not in charge of the deal or whatever's done. You know what I mean? Whether there's a deal done by December 31st, I'm planning on it not being a deal by December 31st because otherwise I can't run a business. You know what I mean? And because if I can't get trees in January, I'm in a pickle. You know what I mean? Because I need to restock the nursery. So we will be stockpiling trees in December. Okay, that'll give us plenty of work, keep us busy all of January. And at some point in January, the trees will start rolling in again, I'm sure. But there will be hiccups, there will be delays if there's no deal, but it will eventually get worked out. And so I'm not particularly worried about it long term. Traveling to select the trees, find the stock I want is more of an issue. I was lucky, I did to do 2 trips, and I did quite substantial trips, but there's a lot more I should have done. And I hope by February, I'll be able to, or end of January, early February, I'll be able to go on the road again. But right now, it doesn't look so good. But I think biosecurity is a serious, even more serious problem than either COVID or, Brexit, because
that's my next question.
Yeah.
So please tell us what you think we've got on the horizon when it comes to biosecurity, phytosanitary implications and the additional work that we're going to have to do in order to move plants?
Well, I think if Nicholas Spence is still Chief Plant Officer for the UK, I don't expect there'll be any problems, you know, with how things will work initially. She's a very practical, pragmatic woman. So I think she said that she will take all the EU standards and make them the UK standards on day one. But I think very quickly, she will then start deciding she doesn't want all of us in the UK. She said that quite vocally and tweeted that lots of times. So I could see her banning olive trees coming into the UK. She might ban lavenders or things like that she might do. But I think she'll also look at, there's no point, you know, saying you can't bring trees in because I don't want them in the UK if there's not a national supply that we could, otherwise we'll be out of business, you know what I mean? So I think there's certain things that, for, you know, making sure Xylella doesn't arrive in the UK, should say the risk is too high to bring olives in, so we can stop olive trees coming in. But Platanus, as long as we've got the papers for it, and it's been grown on a nursery free of, you know, Platanus blight in an area of Europe, I don't see there be an issue why she will let us continue to get Platanus in. And the same with oaks, you know, will she ever let us get oaks in the continent again? That's a good question, but, you know, OPM, I said 3 years ago, if we don't have our oaks go into quarantine when they arrive in the UK, we'll get OPM all over the UK. Well, unfortunately, it's happened now.
Yeah.
And it's not all over the UK yet, but it's definitely far more widespread than we like. But the next
it's spreading further still.
Yeah, the pine procession moth we don't have yet, but that is a serious problem as well. And they look really nasty nests on all the pines as well if you're coming up through France now. And the last thing we want is have that here too.
Is the reason you stopped, or you've only got one olive left on the nursery, was it a deliberate measure to mitigate this? From our perspective, we stopped selling them about 3 or 4 years ago because it just wasn't worth the risk.
Yeah, I stopped bringing them in 3 years ago, and there's not one that's left on the nursery from all those years ago.
Also, I think there's less demand for them now than there was. Perhaps they've had some of their moment. Deric, what do you think about our phytosanitary implications and our biosecurity?
I'm going to be led by the science.
Right, okay. Like the government. Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, led by the science. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and we'll just see that. I think what's really important is that, you know, crikey, you know, Great Britain, the island of Great Britain is a huge amount of what it is and what we face at the moment is because it is an island. You know, we don't have rabies, we have Brexit because we're an island and we're used to sort of having this sort of physical barrier. And it's what's always so amazing when you travel on the continent is the fact that it's just one massive landmass. I was fortunate enough to get away at the start of the spring, went on a bit of a busman's to the Netherlands for a week. And I get worried when I'm walking the dog around Ashridge Forest and I think, oh crikey, if she finds a deer, she might be off for a good mile's run or something like that. And we took the dog to the Netherlands. This is completely pointless conversation, but and I was thinking, crikey, if she gets sniff of a deer around this nursery, because obviously you're going to go and have a look at some trees while you're there, she could run all the way down to the tip of Portugal. She could be in Vladivostok if she, you know, it's just this landmass. So we're going to be led by the science. I'm absolutely with Steve. I think that the government agencies are going to be hopefully very sensible and pragmatic about it. What's really important to remember, though, is that the nurseries on the continent that are growing the trees that we may well be importing are not rife with disease. They've not got trees dying left, right, and centre. It is vitally important to them that their nurseries are as clean and as healthy as possible. There is, of course, a chance that nursery production will harbour a disease and will transmit a disease through it. And yes, there is a risk that it could come through, but nurseries are working very hard to have their phytosanitary controls in place.
I think we'd expect that it's going to be the nursery with the least effort applied to being biosecure and thoughtful, at the very least thoughtful about their phytosanitary care of plant import that's likely to bring in the next big problem. A lot of people have recently said that we've got issues with our superstores, or our supermarkets, and our shed stores, because they import directly, and we don't know where the controls are. I would hope that that's not an issue, but it certainly is a possibility that with the best will in the world, careful nurseries in the UK are not going to be able to prevent issues from coming in. We've got a question here from George Trott, which is, when importing large trees from the continent, what biosecurity measures do you take to avoid introducing pests and diseases into your nursery and also the wider environment? So both of you bring in stuff from the continent.
Well, increasingly, I import relatively few trees myself, and I leave it to other people to do it for me. And so, I mean, that's a slightly flippant answer, George. But as I was saying, the nurseries themselves have got their own regulators travelling and inspecting them. So their production is checked at source, that they are free from OPM, that they are free from Xylella and PPM and all these sorts of things as well. So that we can do the same sort of checks on our suppliers in terms of plant health care as we make of our suppliers in terms of human trafficking, in terms of money laundering and all those sorts of things. And you can only be led by what those people are saying, of course, or you can go around and you can inspect every tree before it goes on the lorry. But there's a huge amount of transport of all sorts of vegetative matter coming over from the continent that could be carrying a pathogen. It could just as easily come on a muddy wheel nut, possibly, as it does on a live plant. Dutch elm disease famously arriving from Canada, nothing to do with the Netherlands whatsoever, on packaging timber, I believe. It wasn't a live import that released that critter into the UK environment and absolutely changed our landscape forever.
Absolutely. Steve, what considerations do you have to put in place to be biosecure? Do you quarantine?
Well, almost everything that comes in, it goes into an air pot, is grown on, and for many months, sometimes years, and it's obviously observed, inspected constantly. Our DEFRA inspector was just here, or FERA inspector was here today, actually. We see an inspector here quite regularly. It's not a problem to come. But, we have countries in Europe that are likely half the size we are, and one of them only has 2 inspectors for the whole country. So we have hundreds and hundreds of them. It just shows the difference in the standards of inspection in a lot of countries in Europe. It's, I'm not talking about Northern Europe, I'm talking about Southern Europe. And I mean, there is, before plant passporting, I mean, there was phytosanitary certificates, and it was quite common in certain countries in Europe at those times that the inspector will come to see you and he'd say, "Hi, Deric, you're a good nurseryman. I trust you explicitly. I'm going to pre-sign 100 phytos for you, and just make sure you fill them in properly, and don't you dare ship anything you shouldn't ship under my signature." Now, that is wrong. It's not how it should be done. But he trusted Deric because he thought he's an honest, straight guy who would never stitch him up. But it's not the way it should be done. But there's other nurserymen who would ship wherever they can, on that type of situation. And that is unfortunately how a lot of Europe works. There is chemicals that they're still spraying in Spain that were banned in the EU 20 years ago. Okay, so I mean, there's the standardization that's supposed to come with EU is not one size fits all. They're supposed to be one size fits all, but the actual how it's managed and how it's enforced is totally different. And when it comes to biosecurity, it's totally different. The Germans typically, they're very very much they follow the rules, but you can still get a few dodgy German nurseries. We got a few dodgy English nurseries, some people will say. But I think there's definitely, so I mean, what I typically do is I literally walk fields in the pouring rain, freezing cold, whatever, negotiating, tagging the stock, inspecting it, looking at his mare's tail in the ground, looking at the pests, talking to the nurseryman. Does he have OPM? I mean, the reason I tipped off that it was OPM coming from Holland 3 years ago is because nurseries I buy from were telling me they had there was OPM in the big specimen oaks in the ground around their fields. So I didn't buy any. So that's why we never got any OPM. But it's just unfortunate that it couldn't stop the trees coming in, and they got parachuted into the whole UK that year. And it's just important that you know who you're buying from. You have the relationship with them, which we have. And we trust each other. And typically, like I say, I tag every tree that comes on this nursery, or practically every tree. You know, this year may not be quite as good as normal. I can't say it will, because what the COVID does to us.
So under normal circumstances, we're working on the terms that we're only buying from nurseries that we have a good working relationship with. We're generally selecting the material ourselves from seeing it, having visited. We're looking for other potential risks, and then we're quarantining when we bring back. And I mean, certainly I can echo what the point you made there, Steve, that we have a very good working relationship with the Plant Inspectorate, because they're there to work for us. They're not trying to trick us. They're not trying to con us. They're inspecting plants in order to maintain biosecurity for all of us. And as a nursery, as a supplier, as someone who installs even someone else's product, we're only really as good as the last thing we did. And in the first time we do something bad, well, it could be a reputation ender. So I think in answer to George's question, that there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and we're working with the best people. The flip side of that is that anyone doing the opposite of that is the one that's going to cause us problems. And the problems apply then to everybody and not to the individuals who are trying hard. I've got another question here from Cherry Mills on moving trees. And she's asking, what is the impact of cutting the roots? Is there a guide to the radius where you can safely cut, and how soon after cutting can you lift a tree and replant? So some of that's, I suppose, like an undercut, and looking at radius compared with the size of the tree. So Deric, that's probably moving in comfortably in your direction as a question.
Yeah, absolutely. At risk of going down the whole 90-minute presentation on how to move large trees.
We've only got 7 minutes left.
Yeah. Let's say, is there a guide to radius? Yeah, so roughly 3 times stem circumference equals root ball diameter. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb right across all sorts of tree production. So, 30 centimetre girth tree, plus or minus 90 centimetre diameter root ball. Obviously, the larger the tree gets, the bigger the volume of the root ball gets, and you're going to capture more roots. But that's a really good way to start it from. How soon after cutting can you lift the tree and replant? Straight away, absolutely no need to wait. Assuming that you are lifting or doing that work in the dormant period, November through to March. If you root prune, I would suggest that you don't 100% root prune in one go. Root pruning is it's a very sensible thing to do if you've got the time to do it. Perhaps do up to 1/3 of the ultimate circumference of the root ball that you're going to take, and maybe do that in 3 or 4 different sections. And so you want to cut down, probably go down about 400 mil, 500 at most, because you only want to cut the feeding roots. They're the ones you want to have regrowing. Put a bit of packing up against that, like a root barrier, so the roots as they regrow don't travel out of where the root ball diameter is going to be. But as I say, if you're planning to move a tree at the best time of year, which is November through to the end of March, you can cut the roots and get it out the ground straight away. And really the best thing to do is to get it replanted as soon as possible as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Steve, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Deric's handled it pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah, I'd agree with that. I got it. I've got one more question then before we wrap up from Joe Perkins. Is there an easy answer as to why we don't have a well-developed tree growing industry here in the UK? Is it land availability, conditions, or something else that means we end up importing so much? So Steve, can you start us on that one? Deric, sure. You look puzzled, but
no. I would not say the industry, there isn't a tree growing industry, but there's not compared to the continent. I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I think truthfully, I mean, I've been in horticulture now since I was 16, and now 60. So I've been around it quite a few years. I've seen, I saw what the Dutch did to the, to the houseplant industry, for example. The Danes and the Dutch really wanted it. They used the free movement and I think along with the, maybe not having the vision and the drive to think they could beat them, and because they had free movement and made it very easy. So, and the same thing we've got with, trees. There's a lot of, big Dutch families. Some of them are 6, 10, kids in the family. I'm not exaggerating. That person, area. There's some very good tree growers in that area and other parts of Holland. And they think nothing of working from 6:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night this time of year. Now, how many British tree nurserymen want to work those type of hours? But they were literally, our family, they work silly hours to make it happen. And it's like I had a French lad work me for 7 years. And the French, we all hear about their 35-hour week, don't we? Well, guess what? How the French industry works. They tell their guys, it's freezing cold, it's pouring with rain, you don't want to work, go home. We'll pay you 35 hours this week. And we're going to bank it. And then when they want them to work 60, 70 hours, they just tell them you have to work now for your banked hours that you had off when it was freezing cold. So I think there's been a lot of flexibility that certain countries have creatively, done to beat us at our own game, but we've been very rigid in following the rules of the EU and being our own worst enemy. So there's a lot of competition that has, thought outside the box, maybe stretched the rules a bit here and there, and a lot of lack of vision maybe too. And you've also got, when you have all these nurseries in one area that you can go to, you can go to Holland and you can go around, spend a week in Holland, go around 20, 30 tree nurseries, you know what I mean? And if they, a lot of them only want to sell to, bigger orders. And so they really reach out to people like Deric, because they want to sell us trees. And they're set up to deliver quickly. I mean, they'll have contractors will come and lift the trees. They have a transport system all in place. There's lots of pluses how they make it work. And I mean, I've literally been tagging trees in a Dutch nursery at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're lifting them on the same field in the winter and take them to the yard and load them on the trailer in my yard here in England at 8 o'clock the next morning. I mean, if you asked an English nursery, would they be willing to do that? They'd laugh at you. Now, I think that was crazy that they were willing to do that, but that just shows you how efficient and how hard they are willing to work to get your order.
Do you feel then that we're, as we leave the EU and the rules that are in place, potentially there on working, that we're going to become more flexible? We're going to be able to compete?
Well, we won't have to necessarily compete so much with them. I mean, that is truthfully, depending on how it's done, how things are set up, the cost to buy from Europe potentially could be higher. Okay, so therefore it gives nurses over here a little bit of an opportunity to compete and get back in the game, if you know what I mean.
Deric, what's your
yeah, absolutely. It's culture. In terms of that, not so much work ethic, but yeah, it's just the way that they've been doing things for generations. It's the flat northern European flame of rich alluvial soils. It's ideal growing conditions. You get excellent returns. Potentially they get slightly better weather as well in terms of growing conditions, but it's the size of the market as well. The reason that they will ship to the UK overnight is because to them, it's just putting stuff on a lorry. The fact that it travels over water or underwater is the same as them shipping trees down to Southern Europe or up into Scandinavia. It's just the lorry just leaves and then it gets somewhere. And so it's a bit of a mindset thing, but I think it's more the size of the market. The UK does have an established tree nursery though, the tree growing industry. What it can't quite do, and it's not surprising, is sort of satisfy the demands at the top end of the size and species requirement, simply because you need scale and you need, what are the big Dutch nurseries growing on 300 hectares. You need that much space to be able to have enough scale that you can afford to have a tree full of 70, 80 centimetre girth Liriodendron tulipifera, just in case somebody turns up and wants to buy them.
An awful lot of big tree nurseries have gone bust the last 10, 15 years old to Norman. You know, that's a Lewis side. And there's not as many as there used to be. I mean, you got the Lappins went bankrupt. They're still surviving under administration, but there's quite a lot. I don't want to name too many names who got it because the cost of growing big trees and growing them on to 20, 30-year-old trees is quite, you know, costly. And the equipment exponentially goes up dramatically the bigger the tree gets. I mean, Deric knows himself how much some of his kit costs. And, you know, if you're lifting little dinky trees, you can do it with a spade. If you get into 12, 14s, it's a, you know, it's a little small hallmark, you know, it's 45, 50 grand. It's not a huge investment. But when you get into the big stuff, you got a giant Volvo with a huge Optimal on it, and you could have 300, 500,000 pounds suddenly, you know, on the bigger stuff. You know, so suddenly the cost, you got to lift an awful lot of trees and sell an awful lot of trees to make a return on investment on a tree that big.
Yeah, and the price point has to match that as well. Okay, all that remains then is for me to firstly apologize for my lighting in this room, which has just turned into a disaster as the sun set, looking like a ghost. But to thank our wonderful audience for listening, and I hope that they enjoyed it. And also to thank Steve McCurdy from Majestic Trees, Deric Newman from Civic Trees, two absolute legends. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for coming along, everybody. I really appreciate it.